Damien Green.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm grateful for the chance to bring to the House an issue which is not just of huge importance to my constituents in Ashford, but many people across the whole county of Kent and indeed beyond. That's the withdrawal of the international services which used to stop at Ashford and Ebbsfleet, but which were stopped when the pandemic meant the temporary end of international travel and have not subsequently been restored by Eurostar. I know my honourable friend the Minister will be aware of the successful history of the service, which has been running from Ashford since 1996. It's contributed significantly to economic growth in the area, taking advantage of the geographical proximity to the European mainland to drive economic development and particularly inward investment. It also, of course, provided a large new leisure market, with people from across Kent having easy access to Disneyland Paris in 2 seconds, and at other times of year, quick journeys to the ski slopes. There is demonstrably huge potential for the Kent stations. I will give way to my honourable friend.
Would my honourable friend, the member for Ashford, agree that the international trains running from Ashford actually enhance connectivity, boost tourism, stimulate economic growth, promote cultural exchange and have an environmental benefits for the coastal towns across Kent and East Sussex, including beautiful Hastings and Rye?
My honourable friend is completely right, and as you will have heard, I made the point that this is of great interest to people not just across Kent but beyond, and certainly she is a great champion for Hastings, and I agree with her that the effects of high-speed rail, in this case international rail, can spread prosperity and the opportunities that travel can bring far and wide from the station. Of course.
The case is, thank you, Madam Speaker. The case has been made very well by my colleague about the opportunity for people in Sussex and on the coastal towns. But does he also agree that also applies to people in the North Kent and the South East London area, where it's still much quicker for them to access Ashford International for those journeys?
Absolutely. I'm glad my honourable friend has made that point, because, of course, travelling into central London for St Pancras is often a real pain for people, either from the outskirts of London or certainly, obviously, from the more rural parts of Kent, and access to Ashford, where it is easy to drive, it's easy to get there by train, it's well connected, makes it much easier to intersect with the international services, and you know, I'm glad to have his constituents added to mine and those of other colleagues around Kent as people wishing for Eurostar to restore this service. We have been through a minor version of this current impasse before. There was a time in 2007 when Eurostar withdrew the Brussels service from Ashford, and a campaign over several years which I was involved with alongside Ashford Borough Council and Kent County Council, and with the sympathetic support of ministers in the government of that time, succeeded in persuading Eurostar that a business-based service allowing a sensibly timed journey from Ashford to Brussels in the morning and back in the evening was viable. And this proved so successful that in 2015 a weekend Brussels service was added, as well as a new service to the south of France. Now, I obviously accept the fact that Eurostar is a private company and makes its own commercial decisions. But the UK government has a legitimate and important role in influencing those decisions, not least in the specific case of Ashford Station. In 2016, Eurostar introduced new rolling stock. That rolling stock demanded a whole new signalling system at Ashford Station to allow the new trains to stop there. And that was funded at a cost of £8.5 million through the Local Growth Fund. In other words, this was the UK taxpayer spending specifically so that Eurostar could continue to service Ashford. So far, the return on that for the taxpayer has been exactly zero. By a terrible irony of timing, the work was completed at exactly the same time as the pandemic struck in the early months of 2020 and international services were suspended. So no train has ever taken advantage of this spending. Now, I appreciate that £8.5 million does not seem much in the context of the quantum of money that may not have been entirely prudently spent in recent years on the railways. But the point is that this is not a wasteful investment. It's a good investment that, if utilised, would provide services that passengers want and make better use of the existing railway infrastructure. Specifically for the Minister, then, is the point that, having spent this taxpayers' money, it is the government's responsibility to see that it was well spent, and therefore I hope and assume he will be backing my call for the Kent services to be resumed. Eurostar's current position has evolved, not in a helpful direction. In September 2020, they said no Kent services would stop before 2022. In 21, they said no services until 23. In 22, they said no services until 25. I and my honourable friend from Dartford have met them, and I met them on a number of occasions with the relevant local authorities. On every one of those meetings, I would describe them as perfectly polite but completely obdurate. They are, of course, a commercial company whose contract is not determined by the same kind of franchise or concession model that national services have. Its majority ownership is the French nationalised rail company SNCF, with a small stake for the Belgian state rail company and the other 40% owned by private sector companies. Eurostar has now merged with the Thales Group. And it's undoubtedly true that the pandemic hit them a very severe financial blow. And to survive that blow, they took on large amounts of commercial debt, which they have to repay. They say that they still have the long-term ambition to grow their services, but that, for a variety of reasons, they can't do so at the moment. But today, I think there are two reasons that make this discussion particularly timely, because that low, difficult period identified by Eurostar is coming to an end. The first reason is revealed in their own press release last June about their latest financial results. They say themselves, "We have turned the page on the COVID crisis and are now moving towards a new chapter of building the new Eurostar Group." Their earnings, EBITDA in the jargon, were a record 332 million euros. And clearly, they are now generating cash because they repaid 127 million euros of the debt they incurred during the pandemic. They are now, evidently, in a position where they could expand if they wanted to. But the second reason why I think it is timely to be having this discussion in public is the imminent arrival of a competitor to Eurostar in providing international services to the UK. The Evelyn Consortium says that it has a £1 billion project to buy an initial 12 trains from Alstom and intends to start services in 2025. At the moment, they, like Eurostar, are only planning capital city services. But the advent of competition means that both companies will have to seek advantages, and the free offer of stations that are already built and raring to go is potentially a great advantage to either of them if they have the gumption to take it. And obviously, and this is the point we've had in discussions with Eurostar for a long time, stations are only useful if there are passengers who want to use them. And we know that there are. I've heard the argument that anyone in Kent who wants to travel to the continent will travel to St Pancras and start there. But we've already heard in the course of this debate that that is not an argument that washes with many people. And apart from the nonsense of catching a fast train to travel 60 miles northwest so that you can get on another fast train that travels southeast under the Channel, there is also the expense of having to do that. At the margin, some people will be discouraged from that. And we know how strong this feeling is because my constituents have organised a petition along the lines of what I'm saying this evening. And in just a few weeks, more than 36,000 people have signed this petition, and many more are doing so every day. So there are clearly tens of thousands of people in Kent and many thousands more beyond Kent who would prefer to travel from their local stations, and I think it's incumbent on all of us to make this happen as soon as possible. So in the light of this, I want to ask the Minister a number of specific questions. The first is an overarching one. Given that Eurostar profits are returning and the government has put taxpayers' money into the Ashford signalling so that Ashford services can return to the 2016 levels, what is the government currently doing to support the return of services to the Kent stations? The second is an environmental point. There are many studies showing that international rail travel is more sustainable than air travel. Eurostar itself claims that the carbon footprint of one flight is the equivalent of 13 Eurostar journeys. So as the government is looking for ways to meet its very welcome net zero target by 2050, what is the government doing to expand the usage of international rail as a more sustainable form of transport, especially as we know that there is significant capacity available both on the line itself and on the train paths through the tunnel? That there is no constraint of capacity in this part of the rail network, and therefore it will be good to use it as much as possible for the environment. Of course.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way. Is it not the case also that much of the electricity used on these trains is actually French nuclear power, so it's some of the greenest power available?
Yes, indeed. The rail network in our part of the world has been quite good at using the power that comes from the interconnect, and indeed he is quite right that this adds to the greenness of the travel, and in particular the comparative advantage of international rail travel over international air travel. My third question is about the new customs arrangements that the EU has devised and then delayed. I note that the French government has so much confidence in these arrangements that it's insisted they should not be implemented before the Paris Olympics next summer. But we must expect that the new EES system will eventually arrive. And Eurostar has argued that the need for more checks and therefore more staff is one reason why it cannot yet contemplate reopening Ashford Station. So can I ask the Minister what the government is doing to make sure that the EES system will not penalise rail travellers? My fourth question is about the potential new entrant to the market. I appreciate that this proposal is at its very early stages, but I assume that if it progresses, the UK government will need to give some authorisation for it to proceed, and that therefore it will need to be in detailed talks with the operator long before any service starts running. During those talks, will the Minister agree to put the case for the Kent stations, not least as a way of making the new operation more viable? My fifth and final question is about the wider issue of cross-channel traffic, which, as he knows, is both a huge economic positive for East Kent, but also far too often a huge social negative, as blockages at the Port of Dover or at Eurotunnel lead to motorway issues and, at its worst, the gradual coagulation of traffic flows through surprisingly large parts of Kent, some of them quite a long way from the coast. Does he agree with me that getting more passengers on the train will help relieve pressure at busy periods on car traffic through the Port of Dover and Eurotunnel? And as a final thought, I appreciate, of course, that not all the levers for this decision are in the Minister's hands. But I know that my constituents and many others around Kent and the wider South East would appreciate knowing that central government is on their side in the crusade to bring back the international rail services to Kent. Thank you.
Minister Hugh Merriman.
Madam Deputy Speaker, thank you so much. And I would like to particularly thank my right honourable friend for putting forward this debate on the important issue that he raises, and it's one that's very close to my heart, being a constituency neighbour to the honourable member for Hastings and Rye who spoke, and of course my right honourable friend is just across the border from me in Kent. He has worked tirelessly in campaigning on this matter on behalf of the people of Ashford and the wider Kent area, and I want to salute him for his work. And as I mentioned, as a member who is from a constituency not too far away from his own, I share my right honourable friend's disappointment that Ebbsfleet and Ashford stations do not currently receive international services. I fully recognise the important benefits that high-speed international rail services provide for the areas and communities they serve, including for people and businesses in Kent and its surrounds. And I should state, I was a frequent user of that service, having come across the coastline from East Sussex to Kent, and it's something that I would like to be able to do again, Madam Deputy Speaker. I, of course, give way to my honourable friend, the member for Dartford.
I'm grateful to the Minister for giving way. The Right Honourable Member for Ashford and myself met some 18 months ago with the Chief Executive of Eurostar, and to say it was frustrating is an understatement. It is frankly madness that we have international stations at Ebbsfleet and at Ashford that cannot travel internationally. So therefore, would my honourable friend, the Minister, do all he can through his department to ensure that we have international services restored at both Ashford and at Ebbsfleet in my constituency?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I can provide my honourable friend, the member for Dartford, with that assurance. I have a real passion for this subject. I am particularly keen to see those international stations become international stations again, and I rightly praise my right honourable friend, the member for Ashford, for his work on Ashford Station, and I should also add my honourable friend's work that he carries out on behalf of his constituents for Ebbsfleet Station to return in that way. Both of them work incredibly hard, and I'm keen to see that work rewarded. These services, Madam Deputy Speaker, provide major benefits in terms of the connections that they provide and the fact that it is an environmentally friendly link to our European neighbours, as my right honourable friend has rightly pointed out. A bit of context in terms of how we've got here. We know that, before the pandemic, Eurostar was carrying record numbers, over 11 million passengers per year, holding around an 80% market share of journeys between London and each of Paris and Brussels. Given these significant benefits, and recognising that rail is currently a significantly lower carbon options to other modes of transport for international travel, with emissions as much as 80% lower on some routes compared to air equivalents, it is in our interest to ensure the long-term sustainability of these services. Unfortunately, as we know, the travel industry was severely impacted, facing unprecedented challenges because of COVID-19, and the sector continues to manage and respond to the impacts of this today. Eurostar passenger numbers collapsed to 5% of 2019 levels for much of the pandemic, and revenue was cut by around 95% for 15 months in 2020 to 2021. Eurostar therefore made difficult decisions to cut services and consolidate its service offer. This was entirely a commercial decision taken by the operator, noting, as my right honourable friend did, that it is a non-franchised operator, meaning it does not receive UK government subsidies. During the pandemic, the government worked very closely with Eurostar, as it did with the travel industry more broadly, to support it in accessing the cross-economy support schemes where they were eligible and appropriate. And indeed, I recall wearing a previous hat, the Transport Select Committee lent into this particular issue very strongly and did its best to ensure that Eurostar had that support, which is why I'm now looking for their support in return as I wear a different hat. The department engaged extensively with Eurostar throughout this period to consider the specific challenges facing the company, but ultimately the company secured financing on commercial terms from its lenders and shareholders. Despite a strong recovery in demand for travel, I too am very disappointed to see that Eurostar are yet to reinstate these services from Ebbsfleet and Ashford. Since becoming the Rail Minister, I've raised this personally with Eurostar, making it absolutely clear that I am keen to see these services return as soon as it's possible and when it's commercially viable for the company to do so. And I agree with my right honourable friend, there are some very good arguments as to why that commercial rationale exists right now. However, I do recognise that this is entirely a commercial decision for Eurostar, given international services operate on a solely commercial basis. My right honourable friend raised the entry and exit system, and I recognise that there are challenges at the border, as he notes. The Home Office is the lead department for this. However, my department is supporting engagement with our European partners and portals, including Eurostar, to help reduce the impacts as much as possible. And indeed, this is another matter that I recall the Transport Select Committee raised as an area of concern, with looming dates coming up, which, as my right honourable friend, have been moved. I will certainly put the case for Kent stations when we are having those discussions with our European partners, as he asks of me. I note my right honourable friend's important point concerning the financial contribution from taxpayers and local partners to ensure that Eurostar's newest trains could serve the station. I recognise my right honourable friend's disappointment, given the years of work to enhance the station and the unfortunate timing given the pandemic. I do back his call for this investment to deliver the return he asked for UK taxpayers. However, because of this investment, Ashford remains well placed to accommodate any modern high-speed train that may be used by Eurostar or any new entrant seeking to compete with Eurostar in the future. And on that note, it is important to highlight the prospect of greater competition to Eurostar in the future, which could be beneficial for passengers in Kent, depending on commercial decisions taken by any new entrant. As my right honourable friend made very clear, at least one potential competitor has publicised its ambitions to launch services to directly compete with Eurostar in the coming years. I have been clear that competition on the railways can deliver real benefits for passengers by providing greater choice and lower prices. It would also be an important step in improving the prospects of services returning to Kent stations. As my right honourable friend makes clear, and he's absolutely right, there is capacity on that line. I would dearly love to see another operator bringing competition and stopping at these Kent stations. Department officials are engaging regularly with infrastructure managers and European partners to discuss the potential for new services and routes, particularly to address the unique requirements of operating through the Channel Tunnel. They also stand ready to work with and support potential new entrants through those challenges, and indeed just today I was talking about open access and what we can do to bring more competitors on. I'll ensure it's not just domestic, it will be international as well if I have my way. So to conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, I would like to thank my right honourable friend again for raising this important matter in the House. I'd also like to recognise the contributions and the work from the other members that have spoken, my honourable friend from Hastings and Rye, from Old Bexley and Sidcup, from Scarborough and Whitby. Like my right honourable friend and all those who have spoken, I am keen to see international services return to Kent as soon as possible and when it's commercially viable. My officials and I will work tirelessly on this matter and continue to press for this change in my dealings with our industry partners. Thank you.
Thank you. The question is that this House do now adjourn. As mayors that opinion, say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary, no, I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. Order.